Welcome to the Stash Cast, where innovation meets real estate. Let's dive in.
Lee, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Stash.
Yeah, my pleasure. I've been looking forward to having a conversation like this with you for a long time. So I know who you
I've
are.
planned to make time for a long time, but obviously didn't plan my day too well since I'm in my car.
That's all right. So I know who you are, but for the listeners at home, why don't you give us an idea of who you are and what you do?
Sure. I am a multifamily broker, and I started 28 years ago in Chicago in an urban neighborhood and developed some methodology to drive a pretty commanding market share in a short period of time. Enough so that I recruited my partner to come join me and be a real estate broker. That happened. My wife was a lawyer at the time and a partner. So that was maybe the biggest sale of my career. And then 5 years later, we opened our own company. We have always been sole focus on multifamily and only investment sales, so only brokerage. We grew the firm to be a greater Chicago land. So all urban areas and most suburban areas and a few cross-border markets. And we stayed that for the majority of the last 20 years, up until about 2 years, a year and a half to 2 years ago, we began changing a lot of infrastructure to try and take advantage of the platform that we had grown with an eye towards expansion. And in the last 2 years, we've grown Chicagoland, owned to being active throughout the Midwest, cover 5 states from our Chicago office: Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Michigan, and Wisconsin. And then in January of 25, we opened an expansion office in Minneapolis as well. And we brought him on specifically for growth. We're looking into many additional markets right now. An interesting trajectory for the company. We stayed big fish in a small pond for 20 years, and now we're swimming.
The first thing you mentioned was that your partner is your wife. How do you balance talk about true home work life balance when you're sleeping next to your partner every night?
One of us can compartmentalize.
Okay.
That would be yours truly. And Stella has more problem with that, meaning we basically have business discussions all the time.
Yeah.
Having
your spouse.
it can be. I would say she's blessed that she has such a compatible partner. No, we equal each other out and together a much more formidable team. 1 + 1 = 3 with us.
That's great. So congratulations. That's amazing to hear.
So far, so good.
So far, so good. On table. Yeah. I have known of you from afar for many years. I think the first time we talked, I said I've always admired other brokers who are good at their craft and well respected. So I guess, how did you manage to go about building that reputation? Or had maybe a better way to ask it is, how have you grown your practice to a point now where you're running a multi-state company?
I think it's having some core principles from which you don't deviate. No, I think not. We certainly have core values. Many companies have those core values. So I'd rather talk about core principles. Clients first, always. That has to be the first rule. And as a broker, you'll always put your client's needs ahead of your own. To me, you may lose some missions in the short term, but you develop clients for your whole career. It sounds almost trite when I say it, Stash, but in real world examples, what does that mean? Client first. If you're valuing a building for a client and they're making it's about their business, and if your client is depending on that value, you haven't put the client first. You're using it for your own promotion, for your own branding, on a hope you can achieve client's objective. You should advise that client and tell them exactly where the value is. And if that means there's just not an assignment or just not a path forward right now, then that's the right decision. It means when you're getting to a tough section of diligence and there's a surprise comes up. As you and I both know, problems don't build deals with surprises.
Yeah.
It's helping both clients understand that issue, hopefully navigate a way through it. But if there isn't one, to simply let that deal go, the benefit of the buyer and the seller, once they get that problem solved or that surprise solved, it will be in a better position later versus trying to cajole and push the deal in a certain area. Bad for either client, giving up that fee in the short term, but it's in the client's best benefit and it's a long-term thing. So it becomes very difficult. If there's gray area, we look at it as no, it's black and white and do it for whatever's best for the client, regardless. So that's a core principle and based a lot of what we do as brokers. As a company, the hardest decision that we made, because of the personalities that are in our industry, and some are just beasts, but yet don't qualify for us based on this criteria we established early on. First thing we said when we opened our own shop was we're going to have a no asshole policy. And that means there are a whole lot of people that we have seen could have possibly been really good brokers, but they should pass that test. So we invite them on board. It has meant that our growth has been slower, but means we have on board, are collaborative, are transparent, are open, which all goes back to the client first, always. When you have that kind of environment, it always ends up serving them.
And then you know that you have the right teammates around you, that you don't have to worry about. You hear, and you may have even come from this, but I heard stories early on of other firms that sound like a candy name, where you've got to run to the printer before the guy next to you gets there, or you've got to shred everything at night and not leave anything else out and lock your desk for fear that somebody's going to try and take your deal. So that's part of that
And that
culture.
we came from that environment where our biggest competitors were the people in the offices next to us, not at other below. It was toxic. It's not a good culture. And ultimately, we can have sharp elbows. We're competitive, but it hurts the client. If there's not an open, collaborative sharing of information, figuring out the best ways to advise the client, getting to the bottom of how real or credible is the buyer that we're entertaining. There's a collective knowledge that always is greater than the individual knowledge. And the client should have the benefit of that. You can't provide that to the client unless you create the right atmosphere for your broker.
Yeah, it starts at home. Literally in your case. Interesting. So how you're in a major market, you're based in Chicago and you've grown up from there. How have you found the best ways to compete and differentiate yourself against the large major brands, national brands?
The
Like how
Chicago
have you
market or
managed
an
to
expansion?
carve out a niche for yourself where I would have known of you when I'm 6 hours away and have no business in Chicago except for maybe a weekend out or something?
Yeah. So from a multifamily brokerage perspective, Chicago is a fairly evolved market. We call ourselves a mid-market firm, which means we work almost the vast majority of what we do is private capital, private investors. There are very little tranches in the deals we mostly work. You hear me hesitating because with our expansion, that's shifted. So we're adjusting the different areas. But for Chicago historic, we've been private market. And when I say evolved, I see other areas, other MSAs in the country where really it's dominated by the big shops, and they'll have an apartment division. In Chicago, no, there are 5 or 6 firms that are exclusively multifamily and exclusively brokerage that to the outside world would seem like doppelgangers. And so I would say Chicago's private market is dominated by those firms, not by the big national names. So really in the Chicago MSA, our competitors are not the same as they are in some of our expansion markets. So here it's in Chicago, I think our differentiation is it always goes back to those core principles, client first, and that's the differentiator for us. But beyond that, there's a misperception between boutique shop and unsophisticated shop. So I think a big part of our competitive advantage here in Chicago and historically has been bringing a level of sophistication unexpected in the private capital market, in that mid-market. And that has to do with our ability to analyze, underwrite, and understand our product that our people know because we teach everything there is to know about Chicagoland apartment properties, from architectural style, to mechanicals, different construction techniques, to different mechanical systems, to everything. So down at that granular level, we know all the vendors. We know everything there is to know about apartments, and we bring that knowledge to every transaction. So we're constantly studying, we're constantly honing. Our underwriting capabilities have evolved over the years. Now that we are in competitive situations where there is institutional capital involved, we're still the new seat at the table, but I know that we are outperforming from an analytical perspective many of our new competitors that are in the institutional arena. I know this because we get this back from the clients. I guess it's different depending on which market we're in. When we look at markets where we are expanding, having all the capabilities of the larger firm and the sophistication of the larger firm, but we're still a small firm. So the flip side is we bring a grit and a determination
Yeah.
that many times you don't see in more institutional shops.
The Stash Cast is brought to you by Needle. What if you could use data and analytics to predict real estate transactions? With Needle, you can. Check it out at needle.us to learn more.
Oftentimes we would be invited to proposal situations and we wouldn't necessarily win them. They'd be 50, 80, $150 million deals. And they're like, listen, the only reason you're here is because you guys have that grit. You're hustlers. And that's what we want. We appreciate that. Now we can't give you the deal because we have to give it to one of the big ones. Because at that point it becomes like preservation, where I gave it to a big firm and they made a market for it and it's not my fault, sort of thing.
Yeah, an asset manager or a dispositions manager is never going to get caught on the carpet because when the bigger names go.
Yeah. So when I was first getting into real estate, I grew up in New Hampshire and I went to Boston after I went to college, and I met with I networked through alumni networks and then cold called and networked through other brokers and developers. And time and again, I kept being told, don't tell people that you want to be in real estate because you like buildings. But you mentioned that you help educate your brokers in different architectural styles. And I think that is just fascinating because you can, not so much as like the look, but this came from this era. And in this era, like you have aluminum wire or Federal Pacific or different heating and cooling systems. And I just think that is, I think, wrong guidance to give young people, like, because that's one of the cool things about real estate is that it is physical and you can touch it. So I'm wondering if you can maybe I'd like to just hear a little bit more about some of the landscape architecture, I guess you might say, of different product types that you're seeing. If you can, I don't know.
Sure. You just asked me a question that I'm going to start showing my side stash. You and I both have a data second life as well.
Yeah.
So I'm a geek on data. I supervise construction. So I've always been like, I developed early on that perception and perspective on real estate. And so I just take that with me. Our architectural style, what do I mean by that? And I got to put it in a local Chicago context. Okay.
Yeah.
I told you what I pulled up here at the beginning of this, that I actually, ironically, am sitting in a park in Chicago's lakefront. Lake Michigan is literally right there. And that is Uptown, which is a 12 square block area that is where I started. I just happened to have a meeting with some of our brokers and the client there this afternoon, right before this. So I found this place to park, but it's reminding me of all kinds of things as I sit here and look. When I talk about architectural styles in a Chicago context, you have to understand that 70% of our stock in the neighborhoods, and Chicago's a city of neighborhoods, unless you're down in the central business district of Chicago, 70% of the stock was built in the 1920s and 1930s in Chicago. Okay, we're talking about literally 100-year-old buildings. How many transformations have those buildings been through over the last 100 years? So when I talk about architectural style, is it a central corridor building with studios and ones? That it's a mid-rise building, it's a vintage high-rise, 3-story walk-ups, courtyard? Is it one of these 1970s 4+1s? It's Chicago named for a certain style of architecture. Why does that become important? Because each one of these operate slightly differently. So over time, we have developed all kinds of ways to look at operational information that we have and look at it at a data perspective. We know that as long as it's boiler heated, and most of them still are,
Yeah.
that those operational expenses per unit net of property taxes are going to be in a certain range of tolerance. We know per net rentable square foot net of taxes where that should operate and where the tolerances should be for a courtyard, for a corridor building, for a 4+1, for all these different architectural styles. And they all have different components. You mentioned wiring. There's also, we deal with buildings that still have 1920s galvanized plumbing in. And then there's a whole cadre of plumbing changes over the last 100 years where you're tying copper or PVC or something in, and a dielectric union between galvanized and copper, and it's corroding on the joint because they didn't use the right tape and join it correctly. It's a myriad of things that you can see. So we can tell when we're underwriting a building, if we understand the architectural style, we know the tolerances within which that building should be operating. As we're looking at the owner's actuals and looking at operating statement, we can tell, oh, there's an issue here or there because this number is out of balance. Let's ask the owner about this or that, and we can forensically find out what's going on at the building. Within that, if there's an issue, there's always an opportunity in the solution. And my favorite thing is going through some of these old buildings. They've all got these basements that are just old, again, 100-year-old basements. There's nothing in them except plumbing lines or steam lines or something. And I'm walking through these basements and I get geeked out. I just start looking and looking. Inevitably, the owner, I try not to be so obnoxious that they actually have to ask me this question, but I get so lost in it that ultimately somebody asks the question, Lee, what are you looking for? And I go, oh, I'm not sure, but I'll know it when I see it.
Yeah.
Because inevitably you find something that tells the story of that building, and it's all in that construction and that structure and those mechanicals, the physical nature of these properties, especially in Chicago. We found it also in expansion market, the expertise that we bring. It's a real differentiator with what.
Mm-hmm. No, I think you could do a whole history series just based around like real estate transactions. Like, why was this particular property built here and for what purpose? And then it was repurposed into whatever, or the new tenant, or now it's vacant. And there's so much that goes into it that is fascinating about our business if you choose to look at it that way. Like in my markets, if you bring up a property, I can be like, oh, that was built. If it's newer construction, say 20 years old, I can tell you who built it, when they sold it, why the buyer bought it, et cetera, et cetera. And I think knowing that history and legacy is what makes good brokers good, because my team, they don't make fun of me, but I'll just go on a tirade like that in a meeting with a client. And they're like, yeah, he has an amazing knowledge for that. And it's just, I don't know. It's just, you need to know that. So it's similar. What's a 4+1?
Also, why you're very good at what you do.
I-
Plus, dates back. They were all built between very late 1969, like fourth quarter of 69 and first quarter of 70. There's about a 2.5 year window where an architect came up with a design that absolutely maximized the FAR for a certain zoning of land at the time. And it was 4 stories built on stilts over 1 story of parking underneath it. So the parking is slightly subgrade, and then there's 4 stories on top. It is the most butt ugly looking property I've ever seen. In the 70s, they just went crazy building these things. Early on in my career, I met a rabbi who actually built more than half of the 4+1s, and he was in his 90s when I met him. 4+1s are 9 times out of 10, 2/3 1 bedroom, 1/3 studio. There's 1 elevator right in the middle of the building. The electric mains are in the back, and they're all cookie cutter construct. They all have the same issues. They all have waste lines and some water feeds that run through the ceiling of the 1 level. And so the ceiling of the parking area. And in Chicago, the heat breaks down and all the pipes freeze. And there you go. So there's just these anomalies, these idiosyncrasies that run along with these 4+1 buildings. If you've seen 4+1, you have seen 90% of all 4+1. They're almost the same. They're the bane of Chicago architecture, because Chicago has beautiful architecture. If you've never taken the architectural boat tour of the Chicago River, come do it. It's just fascinating.
Skyscraper photos. It's
You
fascinating.
won't see 4+1s from the Chicago River.
You should do an apartment architectural tour. And this is the 4+1.
Next time you come to town, my treat. We'll go out in the neighborhoods. I'll show you some 4+1.
I love it. Yeah, no, I'll take you up on that for sure. So in Cincinnati, we have a similar phenomenon where they're 2.5 out of ground, where you have a half of garden style apartments, it's flex core concrete construction, brick exterior, sometimes concrete block on the inside, but they're concrete floors, boiler heat, flat roof, brick boxes. Like we have a ton of built in the 60s and 70s predominantly. And it is the same story. They're so ugly, and they can be in a great neighborhood or they can be in a hood. And it's like, they're just there, and it's the same thing. You know exactly what you're dealing with. I heard and you might know this is on topic for what we're talking about, but has nothing to do with necessarily the greater podcast. But I heard a story one time that the reason they put mansards on apartment buildings was for tax reasons. At the time, they were taxing based on how much was under roof. And so somebody came up with the idea, let's just put mansards on the outside, and then we'll keep our taxes low.
I am not, but I am so excited to go research this and see what that means, because I love learning something.
Because like mansards are classic Americana, but then they just took it to an extreme where they go all the way to the ground. And it's, God, that is the ugliest thing I've ever seen.
I always just thought it was a really crappy 1970s design idea. What you say makes a ton of sense. I wonder, I'm going to look into this, Stash, because it must be whatever is lower than the roof line goes to the tax area or something.
And that's why the 2.5 out of grounds are like that, is because it was half, you have the windows at ground level. And so that wasn't considered an above ground floor.
Yeah, I love it. There's always a reason why something is done the way it was.
Exactly. And that's where you can come up with the story and the history. Why did they do it like this? Well, this is why. We're just speculating right now, but I bet we're not that far off. In investment sales, there is very little, there might be cooperation, but there's not really commission sharing. And the reason for that is oftentimes like the buyers are like, I don't need a broker on the buy side. We have an acquisitions team or whatever it is. So Do you find yourself, or does your firm find yourself interacting with other brokers in a co-op situation? Then how do you handle it, if you do?
We rarely find ourselves in those situations because we have specialized in one thing and we track religiously everything, every phone call, every inbound lead, every email, everything. It's rare that someone brings us a potential buyer via one of our opportunities with whom we're not already in.
Yeah.
But it does happen occasionally. And while in the commercial industry in general, I think you're right. There's very little, if any, fee sharing. When someone is serving that legitimate purpose and actually is bringing you someone credible who ends up being the best buyer for price, terms, whatever reason, your client, the seller, deems that's the acceptable way to go. Another time where you got, in my opinion, you just have to go back to clients first always. If you aren't doing something to recognize that broker's role, you're adding expense to the capital stack, which takes dollars out of your seller clients. Again, it happens so rarely, and our typical policy is we don't go up. Well, it doesn't detract. Not co-oping does not detract the deal for the seller. And the times that it does, it's another one of those examples of you just got to do what's right. And if you have to end up sharing some fee because it's the right, somebody's actually serving that role of bringing someone to the deal that you would not have surfaced yourself. That is meaningful. That's a part of the deal. You have to work out a fee with that broker.
Yeah. My take is that, listen, I'm happy to cooperate. We usually don't have enough built into the fee. So if you want it, you'll have to get it from your client. And usually that's not a problem. And then if they can't, then it's okay, fine. If they still end up being, and it's rare, like you, it's rare that we work with buyer's agents. If it's there, then okay. Yeah, you're right. You have to do what's best for the client. What so oftentimes we'll get calls from buyers. Yeah, we really love off-market deals. What do you have off-market? How do you handle that question?
I always try to be respectful of someone calling and looking for opportunity, but that's what everyone says. The question is, okay,
You're back.
Josh, did I lose you?
Yeah, do that.
Let's see what I do.
So we were talking about
Uh,
off-market
um,
deals.
Yeah, and what do you do when the client says, I want an off-market deal? Look, there are occasionally off-market deals. They're just very limited, few, far between. So you let the client know, hey, occasionally we do see it. It's not what we do for a living. Our job is to go out and make a very efficient process out of a very inefficient market. So we are hired to market property. We'll certainly bring you all of those. In the event we find something that fits all your parameters, we'll reach out in the event that stumbles through our office.
Yeah.
Tell me how you handle it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
tell me how you handle it.
it's off-market for a reason because they don't want to sell. And if you want to make an unsolicited offer, a blind offer that is probably going to be above market in terms of pricing, but there's this myth that off-market deals are better than deals that are on the market. It's on the market because they want to sell. They've gone through the process of interviewing one, if not a couple of brokers, and selecting somebody that they think is going to be able to get them the highest and best price and terms. Buy the deal. Just buy the deal.
And you just said something that triggered something in my head.
Yeah.
How about this? The very definition, what is the definition of market value? It's what the fair and equitable price is for the property based on the market competing and the efficiencies to find the equilibrium where that property should trade. Therefore, by definition, is not off market the opposite. And what you said about they don't really want to sell, that's what triggered it in my head, Stash. I think it's down to the literal definition of off market. There are no points of feedback, no data that the seller is able to compare or contrast.
Right.
Therefore, how do you ever know that the expectations aren't unrealistic and you're overpaying for the property? The probability is higher than that case, then you get some kind of steal.
Yeah, off-market deals put the buyer in the driver's seat versus when it's listed, the seller becomes in the driver's seat because they're able to control the process versus if you have just one buyer at the table.
That is why a seller would want to list and market a property.
Yeah.
But if we're talking about a buyer saying it, that kind of leads into why a buyer would want it, is because the buyer is in control.
Yeah.
They also have no idea where the true market value of that property is, and therefore no reference point. Are they over or underpaying?
Yeah. Most of the time, my experience with off-market deals are they end up trading about where we think they were going to trade anyway. It's just so they can tell their buddies, oh yeah, I got this great deal off market. I think that's what it is. And then the other part of it, to your earlier point of working on behalf of your client, who is most often the seller, and I have to fight it sometimes myself. We have a bunch of financials in and they're looking like they're going to go that way towards a listing. And okay, let me just send it out to a couple of people, but you really can't do that without betraying the client's trust unless they've specifically said to you, yeah, it's okay if you shop this a little bit before we actually go to market.
Yeah, and we would never do it without that authorization. We try not to do it at all because we are most effective and deliver best for the client when we are listing and marketing and running through a process. There are occasions where we would do something different. And in that case, it's always a written agreement with the seller. Here are the number of leads and it's usually when there's a legitimate reason they're not going to list the property. We actually see that there is a need there. So that there's always there's an exception to every rule.
Yeah.
In those instances, it's off market, on market, unless we're making an agreement with the seller that it's for one specific buyer.
Yeah.
And they want it sent to that specific person. And that could be for a variety of reasons. Usually if it's an off market deal and they say, okay, you could bring 10, 12 best prospects and show it to them. That's 90% of the results of a full marketing campaign anyway are going to be for those 10 to a dozen usual suspects, primary clients, because you know their business plans, you know their needs. We don't have all this exposure. There's a reason for that too. And I love this quote. I did not come up with, but locks are for honest people. And I love that concept. And what that means is you've got something valuable sitting inside a window and the window is locked. Every honest person's just going to walk by and see it in there. The window's locked and just keep walking. But if that window's unlocked or it's slightly cracked open, and is it really as easy as just reaching in there and taking it? There's a temptation there. An honest person, a good person wouldn't do it anyway, but there's a temptation, right? The lock is for the honest people. The full marketing, the listing, all of that is for those 10 to 12 people. It's the same concept that the locks are for honest people, even though we may know with 90% probability that the buyer is one of these does. The process is what.
Yeah. Or the other thing you'll see, I'm sure you've seen it too, but you'll get a blind copy email blast that says, hey, this is off market, but you know that there are like thousands of people on that blind copy. Or sometimes they'll even screw up and just put it to everybody. And you're like, thanks for your distribution.
It never ceases to amaze me, the boneheaded things that some people in our industry do.
Yeah, exactly. Switching a little bit of gears, you have had some experience in the foundership and technology world. So I guess with that would be If you care to share, would love to hear a little bit more about that. And then the bridge would be, where do you think technology is taking our industry, and what's the future of brokerage? Are we going to be replaced by AI?
Well, my background, I guess, in the technology front, I came up with an idea around some people who had the capability of making that happen with data. I made the mistake of just saying, this needs to exist. This is what's missing. And sure enough, they found a way to solve it. I unwittingly found myself in the middle of a tech startup. I did not want to be there, but it was simply too good of an idea not to pursue. It was a huge distraction. I learned a lot, and it was multifamily real estate related. So it wasn't like, oh, I completely went off. No, it was all related. And it was 18 months start to finish. And we got to the point where we were ready to take on some real funding, right? And I so desperately wanted to be out. And the strategic investor, when we got it, we looked at valuation, we looked at what they were getting ready to invest. We looked at each other and said, this is a solid double for us, for the people who have money in it, for us to get back after this major investor put this money in, after the dilution to investors, owners, for us to get back to where we are right now would have to be a true home run, not a unicorn. So we made the strategic decision. Guess what? For that investment, you can have the whole thing. And a major national firm bought this technology from us. So that was my experience in the tech world. Don't want to go back there, but I learned a lot. In fact, that was what made me understand that I should look more closely at Kiser Group, because that was where some real power and systems were. And because in that tech company, I learned the concept of scaling and the things that had to go in place to make that actually possible. And so I started looking internally at what we had, and okay, let's learn from that. Let's go with Kiser Group. That put us on the trajectory to the inflection point I discussed last year. Frankly, I think every service industry is headed in the same direction. It's just a matter of time before technology advances to the point that a lot of the things that service industry day to day can be done. Back when we had our thing, it was before AI was in vogue. So we called it machine learning, but it's using data to predict and algorithms that appear to have very intelligent, smart answers. Look, I think it's a matter of time, a short matter of time, before the way we do business and the skills and attributes that someone in our role brings to the process morphs and changes. I can't tell you exactly what that's going to be yet. I think I still have a fair amount of runway left. I'm hopeful that it doesn't happen within my remaining runway, but technology moves so quickly that I would be less than honest if I said it wasn't a concern. But then again, every problem presents an opportunity as well. I would say it's something that I think is inevitable. It's coming. I don't think it does away with brokers, but I think the role that we play in transactions will shift and have to evolve and morph.
You still have to go out and prove that you are trustworthy and reliable and are going to do what you say and say what you do. And you still have to gain the trust of the person on the other side of the transaction through that reputation. Now, granted, there will be some transactions that can be easily facilitated through computers, right? Like just an exchange of Bitcoin or something, perhaps, or stocks. But with the tools available, like I use ChatGPT all the time, but if you ask it to do an underwriting, it's terrible. You can't ask it to go out and do prospecting for you because it can't and it won't. But if you say, hey, here's a bunch of examples of pitch emails, write a nice pitch email for me, they can do that pretty well. So I look at it, maybe I'm naive to think that we won't be replaced. But still people at the end of the day that are, I guess, until the machines take over. And then it's not people anymore.
I can see, though, through blockchain technology, through tokenization, equity, through different ownership structures and different ways of analyzing returns, and the advent of crowdfunding and a lot of other things, I can see a time when the profile of ownership shifts. You and I are thinking about this in the context of 2025, when the vast majority of owners are still entrepreneurial investors. I'm interested to see where everything continues evolving, and it may not be the process that necessitates the change. It may be the investment structures and ownership of property that necessitates a change. I don't know. I just know that
Yeah.
I do know every day I'm surprised by technology that and I go, oh, that's it.
Yeah. The saying I use a lot, especially recently coming to Cushman, is you don't know what you don't know until you know it. For me, my experience in coming over here has been very positive, and some of those things that I didn't know have been illuminated, and it's, wow, this is great. Just being surrounded by other high-end professionals, that's a great thing, because most of my career I was like at more boutique, smaller sorts of firms, which are fine, but it's nice to have a big brand behind it, in my experience. Do you tend to hire most of your new agents and train them from the ground up, or are you taking guys that are already established?
Both. Historically, we have only done ground up, bring them in, train them. And in Chicago, that is again, because as I alluded to earlier, our industry is the multifamily industry in Chicago is fairly evolved. Really, the more established mid-market brokers here don't usually change firms. So that lateral recruiting is not successful, usually locally. But there's never a shortage of bright young people to make their way into it. I would say for this business, or bringing people in, helping them learn the business and nurturing the success. In our expansion, we are really not interested. It took us 20 years to grow the firm in Chicago we have by doing it organic like that. I don't have that runway for every expansion office, and
Yeah.
that makes no business sense. So it's really taking our existing platform and capabilities and looking at new markets who already have a book of business and success, but see the advantages our platform will bring them, who would make a move to us. That's what we have done in Minneapolis, and with your buddy Mike. That's what we're
Yep.
doing in several other MSAs right now around the country.
Oh, that's awesome. That's great. I'm curious though about the training, because Chicago is a market. So I used to work for this guy, Bruce Haynes, in Southern California, and he trained Rand Sperry. That was Sperry Benes, Sperry Commercial. And he had this grid manual where what he did is he broke up the whole of Los Angeles into grids, sections. And so I'm wondering if you do that for your new agents. Do you make them go out and, because I had to go take pictures of every single property in my market when I was working for him to get a good lay of the land? Is that part of the training program? And is it effective, I guess, is the question.
Yeah, the training is completely customizable. So yeah, we do have systems and training. One of the smartest things Stella had us do in the very beginning was every training session I ever ran, and this goes back a long way, throw up a video camera in, right? And so we have an entire library of training. My son's summer internship jobs at our company was to transcribe all of those. So they're now all keyworded and transcribed as well. So in this huge, massive library of stuff, an agent can type in debt constant and it'll bring in the 16 video segments, anywhere from 15 seconds to 40 minutes of everything that talks about debt constants, right? Or any other topic. So there's robust training But not every market, not every broker everybody has different needs. So for someone who is brand new to the business, brand new to brokerage, brand new to apartments, is there an element of getting out in the field and cataloging the philosophy that if everything that you know about multifamily real estate you get from the computer, then you're just as good as anybody else with a computer, right?
Yeah.
So you got to get out of the office. You got to go touch it. You got to go feel it. You got to go experience it. Yes, there's certainly an element of that for somebody brand new. For somebody who's seasoned, they don't necessarily need that. For a Midwest
Yeah.
team that operates out of Chicago, they're covering 4 states. They're not going and driving how could you possibly do that? It all depends on the specific person, the specific market and business plan, and then what you need to do to be most effective. What I will say is, though, that we are still very data driven. Your example of somebody new comes in and there's a grid and we cut it up and we assign something. That never happens. So because we hire brokers as independent contractors,
Right.
first of all, that's the main thing. They're going into business for themselves. We're not going to tell them what to do. We're going to help them decide what they. We show them how to fish. We don't just give them a fish. How do you determine the right market? How do you determine the right approach? The business plan can be geographic. It can be product type driven. And yeah, there's a whole lot of different product types within multifamily alone. It can be client driven, client profile. So basically, how much money does someone want to make who's coming to us? Great. What does the data tell us is the best way for you to earn that money? Now let's put together a plan together that helps you achieve that. So it's a very interactive, collaborative process, and it's different for every market you go in. Because every one of them is indeed so unique. So it's what I will say is there's certainly systemized onboarding. We get somebody up running fairly quickly. I didn't realize how good it was until we opened our first remote office in Minneapolis, and Bobby was up and running within weeks. Just, oh God, you guys have built a hell of a machine. So I know from experience now that it works, but it is a much more organic process with someone coming in cold brokerage.
That's awesome. I really appreciate your time. And I think we'll probably cap it there. If somebody is maybe evaluating their brokerage career, either trying to get into it in Chicago or maybe they're in another market and they're like, hey, I like the cut of his jib. What's the best way to get in touch with you, Lee? Or if they have a 4+1 that they want to sell, how do they get in touch with you?
We know 4+1. And thank you so much for having me on. It doesn't matter how small the stage, even if this is just you and me talking, I got to perform. My name does not have an A in it. You can probably see my name on this Zoom, but there's my pullover. It's Kiser Group. Go to kisergroup.com. We're easy to find. Reach out, and we're happy to have a conversation.
That's great. All right. Well, thank you so much, my friend. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
It's been a true pleasure. Thank you.
I have a guy in Fort Wayne that I think would be a good fit for your firm. He's with FVN. He's trying to get his shit together. He's hungry, wants to learn. And I think if you guys have good system, he's with Diana Parent. His name is Ian Stroud, I think. I think he'd be a good one for you guys to talk to. Should I put him in touch with Mike?
Yeah.
Okay.
I really appreciate that, Stash.
Yeah, he's one of our early users of Needle, and he's just trying to figure it out. And like, we gave him a free subscription as long as he would give us feedback and all that. I put out a video on my Substack and I put it behind a paywall because I didn't want just anyone and everyone getting it. And he immediately subscribed to it. So he's hungry for guidance. We didn't talk about this on the podcast. The beauty of commercial real estate is that nobody tells you what to do, but also the downfall of it is that nobody tells you what to do. So
Yeah.
I'll connect Ian and Mike, and yeah, that's all I got for now. I really enjoyed it. I am going to take you up on the 4+1s next time I'm up there.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say if you ever do get to Chicago, we gotta spend some time. I don't know if you're a drinker. I
Yeah.
know Mike's not. I'd love to take you out to some bars.
Awesome. Thanks, Lee. I appreciate it, man.
Hey.
And have a great Okay. Bye.
You too.
That's it for the Stash Cast. Subscribe, share, and stay ahead in commercial real estate and prop tech. See you next time.